The hammering on my front door jolted me from a deep sleep. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed an angry red, 3:07 a.m. My phone vibrated violently beside it, the screen lighting up with an unfamiliar number. I squinted, disoriented and confused, as the pounding continued with increasing urgency. This was not a friendly visit. I stumbled through the darkness of my bedroom, throwing on a robe as I made my way down the stairs. The knocking had evolved into what sounded like someone trying to break down my door with their fist. Through the peephole, I could make out a woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face contorted with impatience. It was Karen Wilkins, the vice president of our homeowners association, a woman I had only briefly encountered at community meetings. I opened the door just enough to speak through the gap, keeping the security chain fastened. "Can I help you? Do you know what time it is?" Karen huffed, her breath visible in the cold night air. "Finally! I have been calling and knocking for 10 minutes. My internet is completely down, and I need you to come fix it right now." I blinked several times, certain I had misheard her. "Excuse me. You are the tech person in the neighborhood, correct? You work with computers." She did not wait for confirmation. "My internet is not working, and I have an important video conference in the morning. You need to come and fix it." The absurdity of the situation momentarily stunned me into silence. I had never advertised myself as neighborhood tech support. Yes, I worked in IT, but that fact had only come up in passing conversations with immediate neighbors. "I am sorry, but I cannot help you right now. It is 3 in the morning. Perhaps you should contact your service provider's helpline." I tried to keep my voice level and polite despite the intrusion. Karen's expression hardened. "This is a community emergency. As a resident, you have a duty to assist your neighbors in times of need. It is in the community guidelines." I shook my head. There is nothing in the HOA bylaws about providing technical support, especially not in the middle of the night. I suggest you call your internet provider." Her voice rose, echoing in the quiet neighborhood. "I cannot believe you are being so uncooperative. Do you know who I am? I am on the board. There will be consequences for this." The lights in the house across the street flicked on, then another. Neighbors were waking up to the commotion. "Please lower your voice. You are disturbing everyone," I said, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the scene she was creating. I will not be silenced when a community member refuses to fulfill their obligations. Karen's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "The board will hear about this tomorrow. Expect a formal warning for refusing to assist a neighbor in distress." I reached for my phone and began recording the interaction. "I am going to have to ask you to leave my property now. This is inappropriate and it is the middle of the night." She jabbed a finger toward me. "You record all you want. The bylaws are clear about community support. This neighborhood works because we help each other. You have just made a very serious mistake." With that final threat, she spun on her heel and marched down my driveway, her footsteps sharp against the pavement. I watched until she disappeared around the corner, then closed and locked the door, my heart still pounding from the confrontation. I returned to bed, but sleep evaded me. Something about her tone, her confidence in threatening me with HOA action over such an absurd request, it sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the night air. Little did I know, this bizarre midnight encounter was merely the opening act in what would become a neighborhood nightmare. The crisp white envelope slid under my door awakened me the next morning. Official HOA letterhead glared up at me from the floor of my entryway. With a sense of foreboding, I opened it to find exactly what Karen had promised: a formal warning for refusing to provide community support in times of resident need. The letter cited bylaw sections that, upon closer inspection, had nothing to do with technical assistance, but rather emergency situations like natural disasters or medical emergencies. I folded the paper carefully and placed it in a folder. Documentation would be important, I sensed. The woman had clearly overstepped, but perhaps this would be the end of it. A misunderstanding, nothing more. I could not have been more wrong. By afternoon, my phone displayed 3 missed calls from neighbors I rarely spoke with. When I finally answered the fourth, my neighbor Ted from 2 doors down sounded uncomfortable. "Hey, just wanted to check if everything is okay with you," he said, his voice strained. "Karen mentioned at her morning coffee group that you had become reclusive and potentially hostile to community members. Said we should all keep an eye on you." My stomach dropped. "What? That is absolutely not true. She came to my door at 3 in the morning demanding I fix her internet." There was a pause. "Well, she did not mention that part. Just said you refused to help when she had an emergency and that you threatened her with recording devices." The campaign had begun. By evening, the sidewalk dynamics had shifted noticeably. Neighbors who normally waved now averted their eyes. A woman pulled her child closer as I walked past. The whispers, the glances, Karen was systematically turning the community against me. I walked to the community center where the HOA president, Richard, kept office hours. I needed to clear this up before it escalated further. As I approached the building, I spotted Karen exiting, her expression smug when she noticed me. "Looking for Richard. He just left, but I can take a message." Her tone was saccharine, victorious. "I will catch him another time," I replied, turning to leave. "Oh, and your trash bins were 3 inches too close to the street today. That will be a $50 fine. Notice should arrive tomorrow." She smiled pleasantly. Community standards must be maintained. The fines began accumulating with alarming speed. Grass 1/4 inch too long. Holiday decorations left up 1 day past the allowed period, despite not having any decorations up at all. Improper mailbox maintenance. Each violation more ridiculous than the last, each one documented with photos that somehow managed to make minor imperfections look egregious. I knew then that this was no ordinary HOA overstep. This was a calculated attack. I began documenting everything, saving the violation notices, taking daily photos of my property, saving every email and text. I installed additional cameras covering every angle of my home and yard. At the market, I overheard 2 board members, Karen's allies, discussing me while selecting produce. "He is becoming a problem resident," one murmured. "Karen says he has a history of this behavior in his previous neighborhood." "I heard he was asked to leave his last community," the other replied. All lies. I had moved from an apartment downtown, no HOA involved at all. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by the growing pile of violations and warnings. Through my window, I could see Karen walking the neighborhood with a clipboard, stopping occasionally to make notes while looking at various houses. When she reached mine, she lingered longer, writing extensively. This was just the beginning, I realized. Karen had launched a full campaign against me, and she had the infrastructure of the HOA behind her. But what she did not know yet was that I did not intimidate easily, and I was just getting started with my own documentation. If she wanted to play the paper trail game, she would soon discover I could play it better. The first internet outage struck on a Tuesday evening, just as I was in the middle of an important video conference with overseas clients. One moment I was discussing quarterly projections, the next my screen froze and the connection dropped completely. I reset the router, checked all connections, but nothing resolved the issue. The service representative on the phone seemed confused. "There is no outage reported in your area, and everything looks normal on our end. The signal is reaching your house, but something is interrupting it between our box and your devices." The next day, the internet worked perfectly in the morning, only to fail again precisely when I had scheduled a make-up call with my clients. This pattern continued for a week, strategic outages that somehow always aligned with my most important online meetings. On day 8, I inspected the exterior connection box and discovered something disturbing. The weatherproof casing had been tampered with, the screws loose, and the internal connections subtly misaligned. Someone had physically manipulated my service line. As I was resealing the box, a familiar voice called from the sidewalk. "Having tech troubles?" Karen stood with her arms crossed, head tilted in mock concern. "You know, my cousin Dennis works for a tech company. He could come take a look. For a small consultation fee, of course. I could arrange it through the HOA Emergency Assistance Program." I secured the final screw on the box. "No thank you. I have already contacted my provider." Her expression hardened momentarily before she forced another smile. "Suit yourself. But if these outages affect anyone else in the neighborhood, we will have to take official action. Cannot have one problematic connection bringing down property values." The next day, a community-wide email from Karen warned residents about connectivity issues stemming from the northeast quadrant of the neighborhood, precisely where my house was located. The message strongly implied that my unauthorized tampering with service equipment might be causing neighborhood-wide internet problems. 2 more violation notices arrived that afternoon, one for unapproved modifications to utility fixtures, and another for compromising community services. The fines totaled $300, with a threat of community privilege suspension if not paid within 15 days. That night I stayed up late, watching my security camera feeds on my tablet. Just after 2 a.m., movement caught my attention. A hooded figure approached the utility pole near my property line, worked on something for approximately 3 minutes, then hurried away. The footage was grainy in the low light, but the build and movement patterns were unmistakably familiar. In the morning, my internet was down again. This time, the service technician who came out found something concerning. "Someone has installed a signal interrupter on your line," he said, showing me a small device he had removed from the connection point. "This is not standard equipment. Someone deliberately put this here to disrupt your service." I nodded, unsurprised but now armed with concrete evidence. "Can I keep that device? And would you be willing to provide a written statement about what you found?" He glanced around nervously. "I am not supposed to give out equipment, but I can definitely document this in my service report. This is tampering, plain and simple. You should consider filing a police report." I was already thinking several steps ahead. This was no longer just about HOA overreach. This was criminal mischief, possibly fraud given the fines levied against me for problems Karen herself had created. The footage, the technician's report, the pattern of harassment. It was time to escalate this beyond neighborhood politics. That evening, I contacted a lawyer specializing in homeowners association disputes. As I emailed over my evidence, another notification from the HOA arrived. My community pool access had been suspended pending payment of outstanding fines. The trap had been carefully laid, but Karen had made a critical mistake. She had left physical evidence, and now a neutral third party had documented the sabotage. Her campaign against me was shifting from annoyance to legal liability. As I reviewed the security footage again, I felt a shift inside me. This was no longer about defending myself. It was about exposing a system of corruption that likely extended far beyond my own experience. The lawyer's advice was clear. Before taking legal action, build an ironclad case. HOA disputes can get messy, she explained. The more documentation you have about patterns of behavior, the stronger your position. That weekend, I transformed my home office into an investigation headquarters. I started with public records, property assessments, tax filings, HOA financial statements, board meeting minutes. As a homeowner, I had a right to access most of these documents, though Karen had conveniently misplaced several when I made formal requests. A breakthrough came when I connected with Martin, a former resident who had moved out under mysterious circumstances the previous year. Our conversation revealed disturbing parallels. It started with bizarre violations, he explained over coffee at a cafe far from our neighborhood. Then the service interruptions, first cable, then water pressure issues. When I complained, the problems got worse. Karen offered her brother-in-law's plumbing services as the solution, charged me through the HOA at premium rates. Martin shared his documentation, a pattern nearly identical to what I was experiencing. But he had given up, choosing to sell his home at a loss rather than continue fighting. The board was in her pocket, he sighed. 3 members always voted as a block: Karen, Thomas, and Regina. Armed with this information, I dug deeper into the HOA financial records I had managed to obtain. Buried in quarterly expense reports were repeated payments to DCW Consulting, small enough not to raise immediate flags but totaling over $30,000 annually. A business registry search revealed DCW Consulting was registered to Dennis Connor Wilkins, Karen's cousin, the same tech expert she had offered to send to my home. There were others. A landscaping company owned by Thomas's son received all the community contracts despite charging 20% above market rate. Regina's sister handled all the community event catering. The financial web of self-dealing was extensive and carefully concealed behind committee approvals and vague service descriptions. I reached out to Marissa Chen, an investigative reporter known for her series on suburban corruption. Initially skeptical, her interest was piqued when I presented the financial documents and pattern of targeted harassment. This is not just about one overzealous board member, Marissa noted as she reviewed my evidence. This looks like a systemic misuse of HOA authority for personal gain. Classic affinity fraud, using community connections and positions of trust to exploit the system. Together, we tracked down 6 former residents who had similar experiences. All described the same pattern: resistance to Karen's demands followed by escalating violations, service problems, and eventually financial pressure through fines or forced services. Each time, Karen or her network of family connections benefited. The reporter helped me access additional public records through journalistic channels. We discovered that 3 years ago, Karen had faced similar accusations in another community, but had resigned from that board before any formal investigation concluded. She had then moved to our neighborhood and quickly established herself in the power structure. A breakthrough came when an anonymous board member, clearly frightened of retaliation, provided internal emails showing Karen had specifically targeted me after learning of my technology background. "Find out what he does and how we can use it," she had written to her allies. "Every resident has skills the community should be able to access." What had begun as a middle-of-the-night demand for tech support was revealed as part of a larger scheme, identifying residents with valuable skills or resources, creating situations where those resources could be demanded, then punishing any resistance with the full power of the HOA. By the end of 3 weeks of investigation, I had compiled a comprehensive file: financial records showing patterns of self-dealing, testimonies from current and former residents, evidence of targeted harassment, documentation of property damage, and a clear timeline showing escalation after each refusal to comply. Marissa was now fully invested in the story. "This is bigger than one neighborhood," she said as we organized the evidence. "This is about the abuse of quasi-governmental powers. HOAs collect dues, enforce rules, and issue fines with almost no oversight. There are thousands of Karens out there, and most people just pay up or move away." We prepared multiple copies of our findings: one for the City Council, which had ultimate oversight of HOA charters, one for the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, and one that Marissa would use as the basis for her investigative piece. What had begun as a personal defense had evolved into something much larger, a challenge to a system that allowed petty tyrants to flourish. I was no longer just fighting for my home. I was fighting for everyone who had been bullied into submission, and Karen had no idea what was coming. The first sign that Karen had caught wind of my investigation came in the form of a certified letter. It was not another violation notice, but something far more serious: a lien filing notice for unpaid homeowner association assessments and fines, totaling nearly $4,700, a sum fabricated almost entirely through false violations and invented late fees. I called my lawyer immediately, who explained the severity of the situation. A lien can cloud your title and eventually lead to foreclosure proceedings if left unaddressed. They are establishing grounds to take your property. The timing was not coincidental. Someone had leaked information about our investigation, and Karen was accelerating her timeline, moving from harassment to existential threat. The next blow came 2 days later: a disconnection notice from the water utility claiming evidence of illegal modifications to service lines. I had made no such modifications, but the accusation required an emergency inspection and a $350 fee to maintain service while the investigation proceeded. Then came the most personal attack. My supervisor called me into a virtual meeting, his expression uncomfortable. "We received an anonymous email claiming you are using company equipment for personal business ventures and possible criminal activities," he explained. "Corporate security has flagged your accounts for audit. I had to report it upstairs." I explained the situation, and thankfully my work record spoke for itself. My supervisor was understanding but concerned. "Be careful," he warned. "Someone is trying to dismantle your life systematically." That night I sat in my darkened living room, the stack of legal notices, liens, and threats piled on my coffee table. The financial and emotional toll was becoming unbearable. Every aspect of my life was under attack: my home, my utilities, my job, my reputation. I had drained my savings fighting false claims and paying for legal counsel. Even with all my evidence, justice seemed distant and uncertain. For the first time, I considered surrender. Perhaps selling the house at a loss and moving away was the sensible option. Plenty of others had made that choice when facing Karen's wrath. The thought of continuing this fight for months or years more was exhausting. As I contemplated defeat, a soft knock came at my door. Unlike Karen's aggressive pounding, this was tentative, almost apologetic. Through the peephole, I saw Elena, an elderly resident from the end of the block. We had exchanged pleasantries over the years but were not close. Cautiously, I opened the door. Elena glanced nervously over her shoulder before speaking. "I cannot stay," she whispered, pressing a sealed envelope into my hand. "But you need to know you are not alone. Many of us are afraid to speak up, but we see what is happening." Before I could respond, she hurried back down the walkway and disappeared into the darkness. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter and several documents. Alina explained that 2 years ago, Karen had targeted her after she opposed a special assessment that primarily benefited properties on Karen Street. Suddenly, Alina had faced violations for her garden, her bird feeders, even the color of her mailbox, things that had never been issues during her 15 years in the community. "I could not fight like you are fighting," she wrote. "My husband was ill and I did not have the strength. I paid the fines, allowed her cousin's company to re-landscape my yard at inflated rates. I surrendered. Many of us have, but we are watching you and we are hopping." Included with her letter were copies of invoices showing thousands of dollars paid to companies connected to Karen and her allies, all routed through official HOA channels. That note transformed something inside me. What had begun as self-defense, then evolved into investigation, now crystallized into a moral obligation. This was not just about me anymore. Alina and others like her had been victimized because they were vulnerable, because fighting back seemed impossible. I spread all my evidence across the table, my documents, Alina's contributions, the reporter's findings. The pattern was undeniable. The corruption was systematic. And while Karen thought she was breaking me, she had actually given me something powerful, nothing left to lose. I contacted Marissa. "We need to accelerate our timeline," I told her. "People are suffering while we build the perfect case." "The monthly HOA meeting is next Tuesday," she reminded me. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking it is time to bring everything into the light," I replied, a new resolve hardening within me. "All at once, where they cannot hide from it." The retaliation had pushed me to the brink, but Alina's quiet courage had shown me the way forward. Sometimes rock bottom is where you finally find solid ground to stand on. And stand I would, not just for myself, but for everyone Karen had silenced. The community center meeting room filled quickly that Tuesday evening. Word had spread, not about my evidence, but about my continuing defiance. Many came expecting to witness my final humiliation as the board formally approved escalated action against me. Karen sat at the center of the board table, Thomas and Regina flanking her like loyal lieutenants. The remaining two board members, Michael and Patricia, sat slightly apart, their expressions unreadable. Karen smiled thinly as I entered, Marissa Chen following close behind. The reporter's presence caused a stir. Outsiders rarely attended these meetings. "Before we begin," Karen announced once the room settled, "I must note that media representatives are welcome to observe but may not participate or disrupt community business." Marissa nodded professionally, taking a seat against the wall. Only I knew she was recording everything. The meeting proceeded through standard updates and committee reports. Finally, they reached the agenda item labeled Enforcement Actions, Problem Properties. Karen's voice took on a grave tone. "We have a situation requiring board attention. Despite multiple notices, warnings, and fines, the property at 347 Oakwood continues to be in violation of community standards. The resident has been uncooperative, even hostile." I stood, interrupting her carefully crafted narrative. "I would like to address these claims directly." "You will have 2 minutes for comment after the board presentation," Karen replied dismissively. Michael, the newest board member, unexpectedly spoke up. "I think we should hear from the resident first, actually, since he is present." Karen's composure flickered briefly before she forced a smile. Very well, 2 minutes. I moved to the front of the room and set up my laptop, connecting it to the projector normally used for board presentations. I will need a bit more than 2 minutes, and I believe everyone here will agree my time is warranted. Before Karen could object, I launched into my presentation. 3 months ago, Karen Wilkins appeared at my door at 3 in the morning demanding technical support. When I declined this unreasonable request, I became the target of a systematic campaign of harassment, false violations, and eventually criminal acts including property damage and fraud. Murmurs spread through the audience. I displayed the security footage of the hooded figure tampering with my internet connection, followed by the utility technician's report identifying the signal interrupter. "This is outrageous," Karen interrupted, her face flushing. "This meeting has an agenda that must be followed. I move to—" "Let him finish," came a voice from the audience. It was a leaner, standing with visible effort. "For once, let someone speak the truth in these meetings." The room fell silent. Alina was respected, her 15 years in the community giving weight to her words. I continued methodically through the evidence. The financial records showing payments to companies owned by board members' relatives, testimony from former residents who had experienced similar targeting, the pattern of escalating harassment following any resistance to board demands. Marissa stepped forward when I reached the broader investigation. "I have been researching HOA abuses across the county," she explained. "What is happening in this community follows a pattern we are seeing in multiple neighborhoods: the use of HOA authority for personal enrichment and the targeting of residents who question that authority." I displayed the lien notice, the utility disconnection threat, even the anonymous complaint to my employer. This is no longer about violations or community standards. This is about intimidation, corruption, and the abuse of power. The room had grown deathly quiet. Even Karen seemed momentarily stunned by the comprehensive nature of the evidence. Thomas whispered urgently in her ear as Regina stared stone-faced at the documentation projected on the screen. Then something remarkable happened. A man in the back stood up. "2 years ago, I was fined repeatedly for unapproved landscaping until I hired Green Valley Services to correct the issues. I paid over $4,000 for work I did not need." Another resident rose. "My internet service was mysteriously interrupted last year. Karen recommended her cousin. I paid $300 for him to remove a device similar to the one shown in those photos." One by one, residents began sharing their experiences. Patterns of intimidation, convenient service failures followed by recommended solutions, tied to board members' relatives, selective enforcement of rules based on personal relationships with the board. Karen finally found her voice, standing abruptly. "This is nothing but a coordinated attack on volunteers who give their time to this community. These accusations are slanderous and will be addressed through proper legal channels. This meeting is adjourned." She moved to leave, but found her path blocked by 2 unexpected figures, representatives from the City Council's HOA Oversight Committee, invited by Marissa to witness the proceedings. "We have heard enough to initiate a formal investigation," one stated calmly. "We request that all HOA financial records be preserved immediately." The second official added, "Given the nature of these allegations, it would be appropriate for the implicated board members to step back from their duties pending investigation." Thomas and Regina exchanged glances before Thomas suddenly announced, "I resign my position, effective immediately." Regina quickly followed suit. Karen remained defiant. This is a witch hunt based on the complaints of one difficult resident. I have done nothing but serve this community." Patricia, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. "I move that we accept the resignations and temporarily suspend all enforcement actions and fine collections until an independent audit can be completed." Michael seconded the motion immediately. The vote was taken. The two remaining board members against Karen, who found herself alone and outvoted. The expression on her face as she realized her power had evaporated will remain etched in my memory forever. Disbelief transforming into fury, then settling into a cold calculation that suggested this battle was not yet over. As the meeting dissolved into animated discussion groups, Marissa approached with a satisfied smile. "This is just the beginning. My exposé runs tomorrow, and the city investigation will uncover everything we missed." Outside the community center, neighbors approached me one after another, some to share their stories, others to simply express gratitude or apologize for not speaking up sooner. Elena grasped my hand firmly. "You stood up when the rest of us could not. Thank you." As I walked home that night, I noticed Karen in her driveway, engaged in an intense phone conversation, gesturing angrily. Our eyes met briefly across the street. Her gaze held no contrition, only cold hatred and the promise of retaliation. But this time, I did not look away. The community had finally seen the truth, and there would be no going back to the shadows. The weeks following the confrontation passed in a whirlwind of investigations, interviews, and legal proceedings. Marissa's exposé ran as promised, front page of the local section, with a follow-up series examining HOA abuses across the region. What had begun as my personal nightmare became a catalyst for broader scrutiny of neighborhood governance. Karen's attempts to maintain control proved futile. The city council froze the HOA's enforcement powers pending investigation, and an independent auditor was appointed to examine 5 years of financial records. What they uncovered exceeded even our suspicions. Nearly $150,000 in questionable payments to companies connected to board members and their relatives, selective enforcement patterns that clearly targeted certain residents while ignoring violations by others, and evidence of deliberate service sabotage, followed by conveniently available solutions. 45 days after the meeting, official action came swiftly. A judge issued an emergency injunction removing Karen from the board and prohibiting her from serving in any HOA capacity. The district attorney filed multiple charges: fraud, conspiracy, property damage, and misappropriation of funds. Thomas and Regina avoided criminal charges by cooperating fully with investigators, revealing the extent of the scheme and Karen's role as its architect. The liens against my property were dissolved. All outstanding fines were voided, not just mine, but those levied against anyone who had been targeted in similar fashion. The court appointed an interim board composed of uninvolved residents to govern until a proper election could be held. At the first meeting of the interim board, I watched from the audience as they systematically dismantled Karen's system. New bylaws were drafted requiring multiple bids for any service contracts, prohibiting board members' relatives from providing paid services to the community, and establishing an independent review process for all violation notices and fines. Financial restitution came next. The court ordered Karen and her co-conspirators to repay all fraudulently obtained funds. My legal expenses were covered, as were those of other identified victims. The neighborhood began to heal as the atmosphere of fear and suspicion gradually lifted. 6 months after that fateful 3 a.m. knock, I stood in my front yard chatting with my neighbor Ted, the same man who had once called to ask if I was hostile to the community. Now he was helping me install a new mailbox. Still hard to believe how long this went on before someone stood up to her, Ted remarked, mixing concrete for the post. People are naturally conflict-averse, I replied, and she exploited that. The system was designed to make resistance seem futile. Well, I am glad you are not conflict-averse, he laughed, though I bet you sometimes wish you had just fixed her Wi-Fi that night. I smiled, considering the thought. Actually, no. Sometimes the right inconvenience comes along at exactly the right time. This neighborhood is better now, more transparent, more genuinely cooperative. Later that afternoon, I walked past Karen's house, something I had avoided for months. A large red "For Sale" sign stood prominently in the yard. Through the front window, I could see her moving from room to room, packing possessions into cardboard boxes. Her criminal case was proceeding, with a trial date set for the following month. The community she had sought to control had become impossible for her to live in. I did not linger or gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching someone's life unravel, even someone who had tried to destroy mine. Justice was not about revenge but restoration, returning balance and fairness to a system that had lost its way. That evening, as I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, a leaner stopped by with a plate of cookies and took a seat beside me. "The new board approved my bird sanctuary proposal today," she beamed. "All those years Karen claimed it violated regulations, and it turns out there was never any such rule." "I am glad," I said, genuinely happy for her small victory. "Will you rejoin the garden committee?" "Already did," she patted my hand. "You know, when you first moved in, I thought you were too quiet to make much difference here. Just shows you never can tell who will be the one to stand up when it matters." As darkness fell over the neighborhood, I reflected on the strange journey that had begun with that middle-of-the-night pounding on my door. I had never aspired to be a community activist or a corruption fighter. I had simply wanted to be left alone. Yet sometimes the most important battles find us rather than the other way around. The lights came on in houses across the neighborhood, not just porch lights but living rooms where people now gathered without fear of arbitrary citations. Children played in yards that once might have been deemed improperly maintained. A genuine community had emerged from the shadow of intimidation. The next morning, I woke naturally at sunrise. No pounding on my door, no threatening notices, no mysterious service interruptions. Just the quiet promise of an ordinary day in a neighborhood slowly remembering how to be neighborly again. I made coffee and stepped outside to retrieve my newspaper. Across the street, a moving truck had arrived at Karen's house. I watched dispassionately as workers carried furniture and boxes out the front door. Karen emerged briefly to give instructions, noticed me watching, then quickly turned away. Our eyes had met for the last time. As she retreated inside, I felt the final weight lift from my shoulders. The nightmare that began at 3 a.m. with a demand for tech support had transformed an entire community. Not because I was particularly brave or clever, but because someone finally said no to a bully, and meant it.